Well, the New York Mets are officially sellers as they have traded David Robertson to their division rival, the Miami Marlins. What do we think of the return? Did the Mets not wait long enough to pull the trigger on this deal? I'll discuss all of that and more on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor, where I'm going to let you behind the curtain a little bit, because as this trade comes in, David Robertson to the Marlins, Arm Layton in our group chat, if you're not familiar with who Arm Layton is, the co-founder of Just Baseball. He was on my show here last Saturday to discuss the Mets draft, and he is the biggest prospect analyst I know. He spends so much time on minor league video and minor league statistics, and he's on the backfields in spring training, particularly with the Marlins, because the Marlins are his team. Grew up in South Florida, so he knows this system more than anyone. And when this deal goes down and we're waiting on names, in the Just Baseball group chat, 3 texts come in when they announce it. Oh my God, Marco Vargas, this is horrible. Now, Mets fans, they see this trade, they see an 18-year-old Marco Vargas, a 19-year-old Ronald Hernandez, and they think the Mets just got fleeced. They just gave up David Robertson, the best rental reliever on the market, and they didn't wait. They made the trade on Thursday, and while I can be sympathetic to that, because honestly, it did seem like it was a rush to trade him. Why trade him now? You had a couple days. Maybe you can get a better return. But also, maybe the Mets have to make a lot of moves at this deadline. Okay, maybe they feel really great about this return. And people who know the Marlins system feel horrible about this trade, which should make you feel good as Mets fans. Okay, here's what Arm had to say about these 2 prospects. For Vargas, he says, an extremely advanced 18-year-old, sweet swing from the left side and a fantastic approach. Hit tool could be plus, 144 WRC plus in the FCL, top 10 prospect in a bad system for me. And I was texting him, after this, and basically he thinks that Vargas will be a top 10 prospect in the Mets system. So that alone, you have to say, for a rental reliever, a pretty good return. Now you get a second guy too, Ronald Hernandez, 19-year-old. He says good piece as well, switch hitter, raw behind the dish, but has the tools to stick back there, above average field to hit, and was also producing in the FCL. Both of these guys were walking over a 20% clip in the FCL, weren't striking out. For Hernandez, 298 average, 464 on base, 452 slug, 149 WRC plus, which again measures hitters based on league average of 100. So it was great in that league, right? Look at Marco Vargas, 283 average, 457 on base, 442 slug, 144 WRC plus. Today, right now, I get it. It's underwhelming. I get it. Feel like the Mets could have gotten more. But we don't know what was on the market. Look, yesterday, I made a mock show where I had the Mets trading David Robertson and eating the salary for Connor Norby. For whatever it's worth, it appears like the Mets aren't eating any salary here. But maybe that trade wasn't on the market. Maybe eating salary wasn't going to get you more. And you were just trading David Robertson for what he is, a really good rental reliever. And if there's not a prospect that's close, or if the prospects that are close who you're trading for have the ceiling of a 5th starter or the ceiling of a utility infielder, and you have a chance to potentially get your second baseman of the future who could be awesome in 3 years, this could be that trade that 3 years from now you look back on and say, man, that was a great deal the Mets made. Gave up 2 months of David Robertson in a year where they were going nowhere, and they got 2 guys who are now in the Mets top 10. We don't know how this is going to age. And I totally understand being upset, man. It sucks that the Mets just lost their best reliever. And it sucks that it's not for a name that you can say, oh, he's going to be in Queens next year. Or a prospect that has, some pedigree in Double-A, where at least you feel like, all right, well, look what he's done in Double-A to show you that he's going to be able to be an impact player, because there's every chance also these two guys amount to nothing. But that's always the risk you play when it comes to making these trades. But sometimes they can pan out big time. And when you see Aram Layton, a prospect analyst who knows the system so well, feeling this is a horrible trade for the Marlins based on just the fact that David Robertson's a rental reliever is going to give them maybe 18 to 20 innings, and they're giving up two players who could have been a part of the Marlins' future. Now the Mets get them. When you see another, Fish on the Farm, which is a Marlins account, said Ronald Hernandez could be in low A or high A right now at 19 years old with his field to hit. We'll see what this turns into. But really, I think the biggest story is the Mets are clear sellers here. And while the timeline of this could be frustrating as a fan, as you think, man, they couldn't have waited a little bit to get a bigger return, that also could mean that there's a lot in the works. And these trades don't just happen overnight with the snap of your fingers. They take time. There's conversations. I am sure the New York Mets shop David Robertson around the league. And there's probably a lot of teams for a rental reliever that were lowballing them. And they found a team that's aggressive to win, albeit in their own division, who was willing to give up two prospects that will be top 30 prospects for the Mets, and one is probably going to be a top 10 prospect, maybe by year's end. The other thing about this, too, everyone sees the 18th and the 21st prospect traded. We got to remember that those rankings, some of them are made 6 months ago, and they don't factor in these guys looking great in the FCL and how that might bump them up their rankings a little bit. So I would say hold some judgment until the end of the season and going into next year, where you find out where Marco Vargas is ranking in the Met system to really start to even have any opinion on it. And further down the line, you honestly have to wait to see what comes of this in a couple of years and what comes out of the rest of this deadline. So I think that's the biggest thing off of this is they made this trade now. To me, that is an indication that more is in the works. And one of the big names that could be going is Justin Verlander. According to some reports, it's seeming like maybe there is some momentum here to the Mets possibly trading Verlander. What that could mean for the Mets, what that could look like, I want to discuss all of that in just a minute. Before we do, today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure that every part you need fits right first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage. Look for the green check to know that the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. With over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay's guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. The New York Mets play the Washington Nationals again, 7:10 Eastern time tonight. Catch every pitch of the Mets hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Mets. Now here we are. Mets are sellers, and there has been some rumblings that Justin Verlander might actually be in the mix to be moved here, which is interesting because he has been pitching really well. And there's, of course, the one side of you that says, well, that's just going to crush this team's hopes even further this year, but you just trade your closer. So now your bullpen is Brooks Raley and Adam Ottavino locking down games for you. I don't know how far you're getting anyway. So this year, all right. Next year, Justin Verlander is going to be 41, making $43 million. Then it's a vesting option if he hits 160 innings, I believe. 140, 160. Regardless, might be actually, I think it's 140. I think it's 140 innings pitched, but it doesn't matter. The point being, he could be part of your future for the next 2.5 years beyond there, the rest of the season and 2 seasons beyond it. Or you could get a prospect for Justin Verlander that could be part of your team for 6 years. And so that's what you have to weigh here. And the question is, who makes that trade? Apparently, a couple teams in Texas, the Astros, the Rangers, rumored to have some interest there. The Astros, Their rotation has been crushed by injuries this year. They know Justin Verlander better than anyone. Could they part with something really enticing for the Mets where they send Verlander over? Do the Mets have to eat money in that case, or do the Astros just take on that contract? There's every chance the Mets have to eat down some money, but if they do and they get a great prospect return, it could be worth it. I personally believe that the only way Justin Verlander is moved if it's the type of prospect return that fans aren't upset with. Like, I don't think they're eating money, trading Justin Verlander, and they're getting this equivalent. They're getting two lower level prospects who are young, who are far away. I don't think you can sell that to your fans because honestly, you just watch how you couldn't sell it for a rental reliever. Tried selling it for a future Hall of Famer and, Justin Verlander here. I think Max Scherzer hasn't pitched well enough to have interest, honestly. So I think Scherzer's going to stick around, but Verlander, look at his overall numbers, and it's, what is it, sub 3.5 ERA on the season now after his last start. He looked really good last two times out. Again, look, and here is the report. There's growing belief that Justin Verlander could be traded, according to Mark Feinsand on Twitter here. This season, Justin Verlander obviously missed the time. He's had a couple bad starts, but he's still sitting with the 3.24 ERA over 15 starts, and it's coming off a Cy Young last year. Look, that's a piece that could net you a lot still. And if you are sellers, you have to entertain everything. So it doesn't mean they're definitely moving them. But when you look at the market, and Lucas Giolito gone, he's off the market. Apparently Dylan Cease is going to be moved. Shohei Ohtani, he's staying. Marcus Stroman, are the Cubs going to trade him when they're getting squarely in this wild card mix? There's a good chance that they might not now. Blake Snell and Josh Hader. Are the Padres going to trade those guys? And even if they do, rental on Hader. If you find the right landing spot, whether it's the Astros, the Rangers, maybe even the Dodgers, who would value that contract on Verlander next year, especially if you took it from being $43 million next year to $30. Maybe you send some money to cover it this year and $15 million on it next year, and maybe you can bump it down to 28.3. There's a chance you could get something good here. So you have to be on the phones with it. And I will say that again could explain why you trade David Robertson now. Because you shopped him, you looked around, the Marlins gave you an aggressive offer. Yes, they're prospects that are low level, but high upside guys that maybe your scouts loved. He said, look, this is a pretty good return for a rental reliever. And we still got to turn our focus to, what do we do on Justin Verlander? What do we do on Tommy Pham? What do we do on Mark Canha? Is there a market for Adam Ottavino? Is there a market for Brooks Raley? I think the Mets ultimately stay away from dealing a lot of pieces that are under control next year. I think mostly they move the rentals. But it's still the right call. When you watch the Mets play the game tonight, right? Kodai Senga was great again. That was an amazing signing by the Mets. And Yamamoto is another guy coming over, I believe. I think it is this offseason who the Mets have interest in. You might have two Japanese stars in your rotation next year. But the point is, you look at Senga pitch tonight, you think that's good for the future. But in a game where he's awesome, the Mets scored no runs for him. They don't score until, the 8th inning when they finally got on the board? And then there's a rain delay, and they come out of the rain delay, and Mark Canha hits a sacrifice fly, and you win 2-1 with Brooks Raley closing, wondering where David Robertson is always traded. But that was the game tonight. And that's not very convincing to say, oh, yeah, this is a team that can make a run. And in years past, the Mets maybe sit on their hands. At least they were able to admit to themselves what they honestly have to for the future of this franchise. And this is a team that has not sold since 2018. And they've made the playoffs once in that time. So you think about the 2019 season, an opportunity to sell. They didn't. Hey, they had a run. Well, guess what? They didn't make the playoffs. 2020, at that deadline, which was obviously the weird COVID year. They could have sold some stuff. They didn't. They bought a little bit. 2021, they were in first place, but it was fool's gold at the deadline. They traded Pete Crow Armstrong. Wish you had that one back. Last year, first place all year, had to add, made a bunch of bad trades. Hopefully, this deadline is going to net something that in 2026 and 2027, when you're looking at a great Mets team, you can look back on the deadline of 2023 and say, hey, man, that year sucked. I hated watching the Mets play baseball that year. It was so disappointing. They came into the season with so much hype around them. But hey, at least Marco Vargas is hitting 320 for us in the big leagues right now as our starting second baseman. So we never know what the future is going to hold. But for now, it is a frustrating existence to be a Mets fan where you have to talk yourself into teenagers because the big league team was such a disappointment. But they did it to themselves. So I want to talk about the rest of this series a little bit here with the Nationals and just the inner workings behind the scenes while you're still playing a bad team and what the rest of the season might look like. So we're going to get to all that in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. The New York Mets play the Washington Nationals again, 7:10 Eastern Time. Catch every pitch of the Mets' hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Mets. All right, Max Scherzer versus Mackenzie Gore, Friday Night Baseball. Who's going to win? It's interesting because this series, if you are still pinning your hopes on the playoffs, which trading your closer kind of says you're not, you got to win all these games, right? This is a must-sweep 4-game series, and you got 3 against the Royals, a bad team. Win them all. And hey, maybe the Mets do that. Maybe the Mets win 7 in a row. But I think you're going to get to a point here where it's, Scherzer started this game. Here's Carrasco starting. Oh, is Verlander going to be able to start Sunday? Or are they going to trade him before that? Is he going to be auditioning for teams against the Nationals? Or are they going to pull him out of the start because he is in, or the Mets are in a ton of negotiations to trade Justin Verlander? It's going to be a weird series. And the funny thing is, sometimes the distraction of the deadline can, make you play tight. When you make a trade, I do wonder if all of a sudden this team just plays looser. And it could be one of those weird things that doesn't make sense, but maybe just because you're out of it, then you start playing baseball better. I really don't know. I do remember there was a season, I want to say it was 2019 with the Yankees? It was the year where they called up Judge and Gary Sanchez. And they traded Carlos Beltran, and they traded a bunch of pieces that weren't really long-term, fits for them. A lot of veterans. They sent them out. They went youth, and the youth played really well. I do think that there is a world where this ends up being the best of both worlds, where you reset your farm a little bit. And you trade Justin Verlander, maybe. You trade Pham and Canna. You clear some spots out. You move things around. And then in the second half, with what's left, all of a sudden, hey, the Mets traded, let's just say they found a destination for Carrasco because somebody needed a depth starter and they got another 18-year-old. They traded Justin Verlander. They, moved another pitcher out of the bullpen. Let's say it's Adam Ottavino. And all of a sudden, you got this team that's left over. And it's like, all right, well, we're just going to play the kids every day. And it doesn't really matter if we're trying to win. We're looking towards the future. And all of a sudden, like Ronnie Mauricio comes up and he hits the ground running. And Francisco Alvarez having a great close to his year. And Brett Beatty no longer has pressure on him, and he starts playing better. And the Mets start winning some games. And it's not that they get all the way back in the mix, but it's a fun team to watch. And who knows, maybe enough arms were moved to the deadline that Mike Vasil finds his way up. And all of a sudden you see, oh, wow, this pitcher might be part of our future. I would rather the Mets play youth, and I've said this before, play youth in a season where they're going nowhere, then they just keep rolling out the veterans and hoping something better is going to come from it. The Mets are selling because the team failed. I'm wearing black on the podcast today because it's a funeral for the Mets and their season. This is it. This was the admission. This was admitting to yourselves that it's over. And yeah, baseball will be played. And the Mets have good players. And there's a funny way of making you care again throughout the season where, hey, the Mets reel off 7 in a row. We'll be tuning in when they face the Orioles. And based on how good the Orioles are, they'll probably get smacked and they'll bring you back down to earth. But hey, maybe they win that series too. And all of a sudden, hey, you're talking yourself into a season. But the Mets exhibited nothing in a 100-game sample that they're going to win a World Series this year. Nothing. And so, if you have a chance to trade your agent closer, who can be a free agent next year, might come back to you anyway if you give him a big contract. Seems like you really like pitching there. So I would not be surprised if David Robertson's back with the Mets next year. And you're rolling it back in some respects in 2024 with at least that piece. If you can trade the last couple months of David Robertson, let's call it 20 innings, and a season that's probably at this point 90, if not 95 to 99%, not going to result in anything. And you get 2 kids that 2 to 3 years could actually be a big part of, if not your team, your farm system. And maybe all of a sudden in 2 years, you're trading one of these guys to get you the reliever you need in a season where you have a chance to win it all. We don't know what the future holds, but honestly, as much as fans hated the trade today, don't like the position the Mets are in, are concerned about Billy Upler running this deadline, and that part I am still worried about, at least the Mets know what they should be and are acting on it. There's a lot of teams in baseball. The Padres are one. The Cubs might be another one now. Teams that should be sellers that aren't selling because they're still holding that I hope they can get in the race. And the teams that decide to sell at this deadline, in my opinion, are the ones that are going to make out with the better future because they're the ones that are going to be able to capitalize on a seller's market where so many teams are trying to buy. And if you have one of these pieces that are out there, you're going to get some overpays. And I know fans don't think this was an overpay, but again, people familiar with the Marlins system think this was a very big overpay and a lot to trade for a rental reliever. Just got to be patient to see what comes from it. Anyway, though, that's going to be all for today's edition. It's Locked On Mets. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. And if you want to catch every pitch of the Mets hometown broadcast this weekend, you could do so with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Mets.